In this chapter, we are going to talk about head-to-head movement. And if you have a textbook, it's on chapter 10 and it starts on 289. And in this chapter, we are going to talk about a movement. So maybe T moves to C or T moves to a V, that kind of movement. And we move things around in order to derive word orders that XBAR theory can't really account for. And I'm going to discuss what kind of word order XBAR theory cannot explain. So there is a problem with an XBAR theory, which is the fact that XBAR theory always wants a head and its complement right next to each other. What I mean is that, for example, we have a head, a verb, and then next to the verb, we have a noun phrase, a direct object of a verb, such as eat a banana. And if XBAR theory is correct, nothing can come between the verb and the NP object. If that's the case, XBAR theory cannot account for the word order such as verb, subject, object as explained here. And 9% of the world's languages, that is really rare. However, there are languages that exhibit verb, subject, object order. For example, Irish is that kind of language. However, XBAR theory always wants a verb and an object next to each other. So XBAR theory cannot account for the fact that in Irish, a subject intervenes between a verb and an object, as shown here. So if we want to say Mary kissed the leprechaun in Irish, we have to have a word order, kissed Mary the leprechaun. Leprechaun is maybe something you haven't heard of. In Ireland, people believe that there is a fairy or fairy tale that lives at the bottom of the rainbow, and we call that leprechaun. And in Irish, the subject intervenes between the verb and its complement. And if we follow the XBAR structure, we cannot draw a tree like this. So in order to explain this kind of word order, we are going to introduce something that's called transformation in this chapter. Transformation in Japanese means henke, or it means ido. Transformation rule changes the shape. Maybe you've heard of a movie called Transformers. In this movie, things change its shape. The robot becomes a train or police car or whatever. It's a boys' movie that the boys really like. In XBAR structure, we also have a rule that transforms things. And in transformation, we move things around in order to account for example, a VSO word order in Irish. We also have moved things around. Maybe you remember affix lowering. There's an example where we have a past tense ed, and that affix lowers and goes to stay with a verb. Or you also might remember that we have a subject auxiliary inversion. What it means is that in yes/no questions, we moved auxiliaries or tense above the subject to satisfy a plus Q feature under C and form a question from an interrogative sentence. And we'll use this transformation to account for word order paradoxes, like a VSO order in Irish. And this is the transformation. What is very interesting is that it's called head-to-head movement. So you move ahead and you attach that head with another head. So in expiratory, head moves and goes to stay with another head. Or if it's a NP, NP moves and goes to stay with another phrase like CP. So if it's a head, then it moves to a head position. If it's a phrase, it moves to a phrase section. If it's a specifier, it moves to a specifier position. So in that sense, there is a unity of specifier heads and complements. Before we talk about Irish word order, I want to touch upon French adverbs first. As you know, adverbs are adjuncts. But adverbs in French appear between the verb head and the object. Let's look at the sentence below. In this sentence, I eat often the apples. What you notice is that the adverb often, in French it's souvent, appears between a verb and its direct object. And we just said that expiratory doesn't allow anything intervening between a head and its complement. So again, the expiratory cannot account for a word order like this in French, where an adverb intervenes between a verb and its complement. And in English, we say, I often eat apples. So an adverb often precedes a verb eat. So nothing comes between eat and apples. So as far as English is concerned, the expiratory has no problems whatsoever. However, if we want to explain the word order in French, we meet another problem. And here again, we are going to use a rule that transforms a sentence, that moves things around in order to account for a French adverb placement. But let's now first look at an English tree and an English adverb like often. In this tree, you notice that an adverb often is an adjunct. Adjunct is something that doesn't always need to be there. あってもなくてもいいもの. So, I eat apples. That's a fine sentence. But if you want to modify the frequency of your eating, you can say, I often eat apples, or I always eat apples, or I seldom eat apples, or I never eat apples. So you can use these adverbs in order to modify or account for a frequency of your eating apples. Here again, often is an adverb. It's an adjunct. It's an あってもなくてもいいもの. And when we want to attach an adjunct into an expiratory, we use a bar level. So here we see V bar, and then V bar goes to an adverb phrase and another V bar. So we use this bar level in order to stick something into a tree. So here often is stuck into a verb phrase and it attaches to its V bar. So this makes sense. But what happens if it's in French? You remember often intervenes between eat and apples. However, adjunct cannot intervene between B and NP. or nothing can intervene between V and NP. So, how can we explain this word order? Before we get to a French tree, let's take a look at different sentences comparing French and English adverbs. So, I often eat apples in English is here introduced in B. The example in A is a French counterpart of B. I eat often apples. So, as I said before, souvent, often, intervenes between a main verb eat, mange, and its direct object apples. In French here, des pommes. So instead of saying I often eat apples, in French you have to say je mange souvent des pommes. And souvent comes between eat and apples. So A and B are examples of simple present tense. What happens when we take a look at genzai kandoke, which is a present perfect tense? When we take a look at present perfect tense, you notice that there are no differences between word order in French and English. So what we saw in A and B disappears in C and D. Sorry, this is a D, but it says B, but it's C and D. So in D, which is an English example, I have often eaten apples. If we translate it to French, you say j'ai souvent mangé des pommes. I have often eaten apples. So in A, the adverb often came between a verb and its direct object. But in C, the adverb often comes before the verb. So in C, nothing comes between a main verb eat and its direct object apples. So there are no differences between French and English word orders in C and D, and it's because C and D are in present perfect tense instead of simple present tense.